Design styles are expressed in almost all the media that we consume. They're in TV shows, movies, and music videos, like you name it. If it's a form of visual media, design will find its way in there. So I figured that there's no better way for me to explain what these design styles are all about than through movie references, because I could put up a picture of a random house and tell you what design style it is, but you'd never seen that house before, so that's no fun. But you probably have seen the minimalist apartment in American Psycho, the maximalist Weasley house in Harry Potter, or the mid-century home in The Incredibles. So let's start with that one. The mid-century modern style is featured pretty prominently in the Incredibles movie. The Parrs family home in both the first and second movie is mid-century modern to a T. The style is known for its angled and asymmetrical geometry and its practical approach to design. But in contrast to some of the other practical design styles like industrial or minimalism, it doesn't sacrifice style for function. And this is a philosophy that Edna Mode shares with her absolute hatred for capes as a design element for superhero costumes. She knows that capes are just an unneeded accessory that adds flair to the suit, but she won't include them in her designs because they can get caught on things. So she designs superhero costumes without them, but puts in the work to make them still look stylish while also being functional. And mid-century modern has become really closely associated with superhero movies and the superhero aesthetic as a whole. The Incredibles isn't the only superhero movie that draws inspiration from mid-century modern for its overall aesthetic. The new Fantastic Four movie also features it very prominently, at least from what I've seen in the new trailer. And there are many other superhero movies that do so as well, mainly because the style was at its peak between the 1950s and the 1970s, which happens to be around the same time period as the golden age of comics. And I just noticed that the Incredibles and the Fantastic Four basically have the same powers. And I can't believe it took me this long to notice that. And now that I think about it, their names are kind of synonyms too. It's like amazing and incredible. But anyways, accessibility is also a huge part of like the mid-century design philosophy. And the Incredibles, the villain's main goal was to make superheroes irrelevant, both directly by actively eliminating them and indirectly by making his superpower technology accessible to everybody. And design wasn't really accessible for a very long time, at least when it comes to designs that were both practical and stylish. Those were usually reserved for the people who had the means to concern themselves with the aesthetic quality of things. But for people that didn't have the means, practicality was the only real concern. Mid-century modern's goal was to make stylish design accessible to everybody, and the emergence of mass production and the introduction of cheaper materials like plastic facilitated that. But now let's talk about minimalism.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me.
It's kind of crazy that I'm using American Psycho as a reference for minimalism, but honestly, most people associate this style with exactly that, craziness. So I'm just gonna roll with it. The main goal of this style is to strip away any unnecessary ornamentation and reduce interior design to its most basic elements. If you Google chair, table, or any other piece of furniture, whatever pops up first is the most base level image that best describes what it is, and that's what minimalism strives for, sameness. And that's mainly why it's so heavily criticized, because identity and personality are something that we often find to be super important when it comes to design and artistic expression. And in a lot of ways, minimalist principles are incompatible with that. But it's important to note that minimalism isn't just about reducing everything to its default setting. Multifunctional design is also a huge part of its design philosophy. It's this idea that a lot of the time, less is more when it comes to design, and that one thing can be built to provide multiple functions. Which brings me to the other example of minimalism that I'm going to talk about, which is Severance. If you haven't watched the show, a little bit of a spoiler warning here, but it's about this company that basically rewires your brain so that there are two versions of yourself. One that's responsible for work and one that's responsible for your personal life. But the company's main goal is to allow people to split their identity into multiple different versions of themselves that are each tasked with different roles. So what they're doing here is basically stripping people of their identity to make them more efficient, and multi-purpose designs can sometimes feel like that. You know, when a bed is a couch, a shelf, and a desk all at once, it often feels like it's everything but nothing at the same time. There are certain aesthetic qualities about each of those objects that has to be sacrificed in order for them to work together. Minimalists value function over aesthetics. To them, buying two things with the same function is excessive because the function they provide doesn't increase by having two of them, but the space they take up does. And on that note, let's move on to the next style, Brutalism. Okay, so brutalism can be broken down into two main categories. There's the bomb type of brutalism and the zombie type of brutalism, but they both share the same foundation, a concrete one. But let's start off with the bomb one. This is the standard form of brutalism. It's all about using concrete to its fullest extent, but most buildings use concrete, so what makes brutalism any different from that? Well, the thing about brutalist buildings is that concrete isn't only used as a structural element, it's also used as a decorative one. Other types of buildings will usually mask their use of concrete by adding ornamentation to their buildings, but brutalism absolutely hates unnecessary decoration. But if you take all the decoration away, you're left with an ugly concrete shell of a building that lacks any visual interest. So to offset that, brutalist designers will make use of scale to add an element of visual interest without resorting to ornamentation, which is why brutalist buildings will often look like these large, imposing monolithic structures. They look like bomb shelters. It's because the design is based around the idea of using broad strokes to add interest to a building instead of finer ones. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the zombie type of brutalism, which is eco-brutalism. This isn't really a style of brutalism, it's more of a branch of brutalism. And I guess branches are exactly what sets it apart from the base form of brutalism. Eco-brutalism is marked by the use of foliage in any of its forms, be it trees, plants, or moss, as a major design element in concrete buildings. And this is where the whole zombie connotation comes into play, because these types of movies or shows will almost always feature a city that's been reclaimed by nature. Basically a city that's become a literal concrete jungle after an apocalyptic event. The Last of Us is a great example of this trope. It isn't exactly a zombie show, but it follows the same theme. There's an apocalyptic event that wipes out most of humanity, and it was brought about by an infectious agent. But what makes The Last of Us such a great example is the fact that nature's reclamation of the city isn't presented as a byproduct of the apocalypse, it's actually the root cause of it. The fungi aren't just infecting the humans, they're also infesting the buildings. So in this case, nature is antagonistic. It's reclaiming what it lost, right? It's retaliating because we weren't building our cities around nature, we were building over it. But it doesn't need to be that way. There are better ways to incorporate nature into our urban spaces that take into account both the human need for infrastructure and nature's need for expansion and growth. Eco-brutalism is all about bridging that gap and finding ways to incorporate nature into our buildings, but not as an afterthought, but as an integral design element. We're not talking about adding a few plants here and there for the vibes. It's more about honing in on the benefits that natural intervention can bring to a building. And these can be indirect benefits like improving air quality, or direct benefits like how certain plant fibers can be mixed into concrete to strengthen it. But enough about brutalism, let's talk about maximalism. Maximalism is more of an umbrella term for a lot of different design styles. It includes modern styles like Memphis and eclecticism, and more traditional styles like Rococo and Baroque. But at the end of the day, they're all rooted in one core idea: less is not more. More is more. Minimalists try and avoid excess, but maximalists welcome it. They believe that the value of something isn't solely determined by its function, but also by the various different forms that it can take. For example, buying 5 different flower pots that all serve the same purpose might seem excessive to a minimalist, but to a maximalist, each variation of that flower pot has a unique quality that sets it apart from the others. But there are really two types of maximalists, and it really just depends on what the motivation behind their maximalist tendencies is. There's scarcity-driven maximalists and excess-driven maximalists. Scarcity maximalists collect items because of a concern for potential loss. An example of this is the Weasley house from Harry Potter. The Weasleys were well off in many different ways, but not financially. Their house is more of a collection of mismatched things that they have accumulated over the years as the need for them arose. Their maximalism was not driven by a desire to have more, but to avoid the risk of not having enough. Excess-driven maximalists collect items because of a concern for potential gain. They source items with the security of knowing that what they have is already enough, which allows them to have a more preemptive and calculated approach to collecting. And this usually results in a collection that is more cohesive, meaning that everything follows a certain aesthetic or theme because they're looking at their collection as a whole and sourcing items that add to that whole. They're concerned with what each individual item brings to the table, as opposed to scarcity-driven maximalists who are making sure there are enough seats at the table. But now let's talk about another style that's also maximalist, but in a different way. It's more about maximizing the size of things instead of the quantity of things.
They fixed their neon.
So I know what you guys are thinking. You're probably like, is this guy really going to use another animated movie to explain a design style? And I'm going to, but I have a reason for it, because I think that Cars is the most fitting example of the Googie style, because the movie is literally about a world that's built around cars. And cars are the reason why the Googie style exists in the first place. You probably already spotted a few examples of this style in amusement parks like Disneyland or in Southern California in general, because that's where the style originated. originates from. It's very colorful and geometric, but what do cars have to do with that? Well, the Googie style was popular around the 1940s and 50s. After the Second World War, there was a huge economic boom and a rise in car usage in the United States, and that meant that advertisers now had to both grab the attention of people driving fast cars and also make the buildings car-friendly. And that's when you see a rise in car-centric architecture like drive-in cinemas, diners, and car washes with these huge, over-the-top designs that are meant to grab your attention as you drive past them. The style was also heavily influenced by the space travel of the 1950s. The Space Needle in Seattle and the Theme Building in LAX are two of the most famous examples of the space-age inspiration behind Googie architecture. And to me, the style is weirdly nostalgic, even though I clearly wasn't alive when it was popular. But that probably goes hand in hand with how prominently it's featured in Pixar movies like Cars, Toy Story, and even Monsters, Inc. Pixar leans heavily into the retro-futurism aesthetic, so it makes sense that the Googie style serves as a major reference for their films.
This is the main deck.
Okay, let's talk about industrial design because this style is basically allergic to fakeness. It's all about keeping things raw and real. You won't see any fancy ornamentation that's meant to mask the uglier parts of a building. Instead, the focus will be on those behind-the-scenes elements that make the structure work. But how does the Matrix relate to all of this? Well, if I had to describe the Matrix and the industrial style's aesthetic qualities in just 3 words, it'd be weathered, leather, and tethered. Let's start off with weathered. In the Matrix, the real world has a very worn down and gritty look to it. I mean, it was taken over by robots, so it tracks, but the robots were well aware that humans would not respond well to that aesthetic, right? So they created a simulation to mask the reality of the world, but the industrial style is not at all concerned with covering up any imperfections or flaws. It actually fully embraces them. For industrial design fans, calling a space a hole in the wall is not an insult. It's actually a badge of honor. You'll see a lot of exposed beams, visible ductwork, and exposed brick walls, and maybe even some pipes and wires here and there. And this goes hand in hand with the fact that most industrial spaces are old factories or repurposed lofts. So by default, these types of spaces will have a worn down quality to them. The issue with that is that when you take all these industrial elements and stuff them into a tiny space, your end result is going to look like a prison. So in order for the industrial style to work, you need to balance out those elements by ensuring that there is enough natural light and a lot of open space. Now, as for why leather is an integral element in the Matrix, I don't think that needs any explanation. I mean, just throw on a leather jacket and a pair of sunglasses that are too small for your face and you got yourself a Matrix costume. And when it comes to industrial style spaces, leather is just the fabric of choice. And finally, let's talk about the tethered element. Most, if not all, of the ceiling fixtures in industrial spaces are tethered to some long table. Why? Well, because the style has become synonymous with open concept spaces and high ceilings. If your ceiling is 20 feet tall, you're not going to install a ceiling light that drops down by a few feet. It would just look ridiculous. And this is why warehouse pendant lights are such a huge staple in industrial style spaces. And those are those lamps that you'd see in like a detective movie that sway around for like a dramatic effect. But anyway, the main point is that the industrial design style does not shy away from any sort of visible wires or cables, and neither do the characters in the Matrix. Their whole setup is basically a bunch of visible wires, repurposed computer parts, and just an overall mess. It's basically every mom that has a gamer kid's worst nightmare because you know that kid is running an Ethernet cable through the entire house to get a slightly better internet speed. The gamer and the Matrix characters are not concerned about the aesthetic consequences of a visible wire as long as it gets the job done, and that's exactly what the industrial style is all about. Let's talk about Art Deco, which is the design style that was featured in the Great Gatsby movie. This style was popular in the 20s and 30s, which happens to be both the preferred age range of the movie's lead actor and the time frame of the Prohibition era. Alcohol was banned during the Prohibition, and this led to an increase in the demand for furniture pieces that were designed to have hidden drawers to stash the bottles away. And some of these furniture makers got really creative with their designs by making the drawers look like they were part of the artwork that was etched onto the furniture to make it even more discreet. But apart from that, nothing about Art Deco is meant to be discreet. The decoration is actually very flashy and over the top. The style's defining features are gold and metallic ornamentation and sharp geometric shapes, which are elements that you see in a lot of ancient Egyptian architecture. King Tut's tomb was actually discovered during the 1920s as well, so it's no surprise that ancient Egypt was a major influence on the Art Deco style. The floors are usually made of marble or granite because when it comes to Art Deco interiors, wooden floors just wouldn't happen unless the wood has been painted over and lacquered to the point where you can't even tell it's wood anymore. But the exteriors of Art Deco buildings are designed so that you can tell exactly what they are. For example, the Chrysler building is basically a giant billboard for the company. The building's ornamentation was designed to look like Chrysler car parts, specifically the car's hubcaps and hood ornaments. And in some cases, the building's design is a callback to the Prohibition era, like the Carbide and Carbon building, which was designed to look like a champagne bottle from top to bottom, or bottoms up, I guess. And those are all the design styles that I'm covering in this video. If there's any other design style that you'd like me to talk about next time, drop a comment down below, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video.